Mamedika Chika, today I'm going to show you my journey, share my journey with you onto how I have built my assets by balancing, the assets versus liabilities at different stages of life. When you've just started working, certainly you must buy the day-to-day, consumable goods. As a starter, you need to buy the clothes, the electronics, furniture, the day-to-day use things. Certainly they are meant to be taking a bigger percentage of your income, and you don't have yet full assets. They are assets, but they are movable assets. You have a sound system there, you have a TV, digital TV there. You certainly have some assets, but those are movable assets. They are an essential part, and they form the biggest percentage of your asset base. You will be very lucky at that stage if you still have some cash left. That is, having some liquid assets aside, like some cash reserves in the bank, or that you are having these days mobile money on your phone. But certainly, if you are lucky to have it 80% movable assets and 20% cash reserves, in your earlier years of starting off working up to around the second year, you are good to go. But as you go on, yes, you must start reducing onto the movable assets. The movable assets now I'm talking about, even including the cars, vehicles. So at a certain point in life, when you are 27 or you are onto your 4th year of work and you purchase a car, it is going to drain your resources. In fact, you'll be having the car as an asset, constituting to some people about 90% of your asset base, being that single motor vehicle. And unfortunately, in some of our countries where we don't insure them, because in some other countries you could be holding it 90% and it is insured. So your degree of loss, can be compensated. But then you should reach a certain stage where you should now be more mindful about these movable assets. People can keep some of their assets into jewelry. He has a lot of jewelry. He has so many collector shoes and the rest. The wardrobe is full. But do people always mind about my wardrobe is full? All the cosmetics are there, jewelry is there, perfumes are there. But how about my wallet? Is there some money in my wallet? Is there some money in the bank account? Or do I have some stocks? Now this is what on the 4th, 5th, 6th year, you should start thinking about my movable assets versus my current assets. The current assets could be into liquidity. Are you the type who is beginning to buy some stocks? Are you the type who is beginning to buy some shares? Or are you the type who is putting some money into the unit trust to save? Are you the person who is saving with the bank or, these circles? So now you start measuring. If you find that your movable assets are far much higher than your fixed assets or current assets, you should start adjusting. That car that you bought, if you take it's proportionate to the rest of the other assets that you have, at the start of buying that car, it might be skewed. The car might be your biggest asset. But around the 2nd or 3rd year, you should do a self-check and say, yes, is the car still constituting 80% of my asset base? No, probably I should reduce. And you work out a balance. You don't have to sell the car, but you might work so hard to increase onto either the income base or savings into other areas, so that you start now building the liquid asset base. The liquid asset base. I'm talking in terms of people who are in their early 30s there. You should now be the kind of person who is reflective of some of the ostentatious goods that you are purchasing. You are very mindful about a very expensive, perfume. You are very mindful of buying every latest, electronic gadget that is on the market. This at our times, there used to be music systems. I love music. I used to buy every state-of-the-art music system up to the level, the highest, which was a rack system. That was a movable system, digital, almost all areas. And it could pound, and I was in my home, and it was like a disco. I could move one of the speakers or two into the compound, and the neighbors could either complain or enjoy the music, depending on the type of music that I had put in. But also at a certain time, I was also very mindful of my liquid assets. How much money do I have in Barclays Bank? It used to be Barclays Bank. It became Absa. At least I was an expatriate worker. I was working in South Africa. I was well paid, starting with a contractual job, then becoming a permanent job that they could not terminate me. So I was tabulating in even my income. I'd grown into middle management levels. I was the head of department. Then I became a deputy principal. It is part of your liquid asset when you tabulate into, I have a permanent job, then you can afford to spoil yourself with a Beamer, I rose through the ranks so fast that at one point, when I got my huge amount of money, I talked about it, I went and bought a BMW 325i Shadow Line, mileage 048, just delivery mileage, when I was 28. And even at the pedigree of losing BMW warranty, I went ahead and changed the sound system. Because any wire that you could cut onto the vehicle, you are spoiling your warranty. I did it because I wanted to put in a heavy music system. I had to put in an amplifier, earthquake, big sound system, and the whole thing was boom, boom, and everything, and removed even the exhaust system. I put in a free flow system because I wanted my car to be all the time. But that was the age, 28. But I had a good job. I was assured I was already into the middle managerial position, and I had good earnings. But neither did that kind of activity leave me dry. Maybe in the year of purchasing that BMW, it left me dry. But I went back onto my savings spree because I'm on record as a person who is mean. People used to say, but what's wrong with this guy? Even the students, because I was staying in a schoolhouse, they used to say, this guy just park his vehicle there and cover it with the, how do they call it? Yeah, I was covering it, only removing it on the weekend when we were going to do shopping. So I wasn't moving with my machine, going Durban, Cape Town, making so many long distances because the car would depreciate, but also you would incur the running cost like fuel. So whilst I was purchasing those machines and, high upper end, I was also tightening into other areas so that I can maintain my savings. So within a year or so, I had rebuilt my savings back. And at least I was smart enough that I think I've ever recalled onto that BMW. I brought it here in Uganda in December of 1995. 95, yeah. It was pounding music, I went to Shell Chireka there and all people were mesmerized. I was 28, but people were calling Muzei. Muzei were calling money. You old man, you made your money. When I was 28. And when I parked it at the taxi park, there was a backyard. At the backyard of the taxi park, one senior army officer, he was a brigadier general. He came to me and said, you fool, sell me this machine. I said, man, I'm not selling it. He said, no, an amount of money that you want. The guy doubled the money. Was it $60,000? And I had nowhere to take the money. I had to take it onto a Forex bureau on Karimu's building because I had a friend there. I just realized recently that actually that Forex bureau wasn't for Karim. It was for now one gentleman who is my parent. I won't mention his name. He has so many Forex bureaus. And I kept my money there because he gave me cash and he gave me the car and the South African logbook. So I got my money. It was large amounts. In fact, I was supposed to stay longer in Uganda, but the excitement was too huge. I put about $25,000 into my Barclays account here in Uganda, flew back to go and make a deposit on another car in South Africa. so that I could also bring the following year. That's how people should be able to build and build. Now, it reaches a time when you have now squared off. Your movable asset as a percentage of your assets has gone down. It reached a point when I was from 35 upwards. My movable assets reduced. I continue with the movable assets because I invested into vehicles. Vehicles can be a movable asset, or it can be an investment if it is you are into the transport or haulage business. So if someone has so many trucks are movable assets. But don't say you are having a lot of movable assets. No, trucks is his core business. So if he has so many trucks, where I had so many taxis, you don't tell me that you are skilled. You have so many movable assets. No, my taxis had now moved away from being movable assets. They had now become current assets, and which were now becoming productive assets, though they were depreciative productive assets. So I operated the taxis for about 5 years and outgrew them. At that time, I had the tendency of realizing I have also to keep balance of my movable assets. I remember I was the only taxi don in Uganda who had a BMW. I had a BMW 32, free flow, 320, free flow, D, which I used to go into the taxi park, and every taxi could give way. Every taxi could give way because they would say the Mfalme has reached. Anytime when I was entering the road, all taxis could stop because I was the taxi don, whilst I was still teaching at Kaboja Secondary School. So, learn how to balance. So how did I get to buy that BMW? I think one day I bought 80 taxis in one single go. I sold off 4 old ones, got a facility with Barclays, and then topped up and bought 8 taxis in one single go. Then one of my neighbors had a BMW, which had just been brought in and was selling it. He had got an issue. So I said, I'm here. I paid for it cash. And there I was, the only taxi don with the free flow BMW, whilst most other taxi owners were already sitting around. I was cruising in there in a Mercedes. So then, when I reached 35, 36, I decided to start now getting the fixed assets. That's when I bought my first plot of land, where my home is right now. And I still had to calculate. My wife was always under a lot of pressure. You people, you went and worked outside for more than 10 years. You came back here. You're having fleets of taxis. Your man hasn't bought land and he hasn't built yet. But my wife has a lot of full confidence in me. In fact, I should go on record. My wife is a very smart lady. She did the trick on me. She gave me her 3 million savings and said, Tata, I'm giving you this money so that you can top up so that we buy a plot of land. So when that woman stays into that Mienga home, it is her 311. Because she brought the first initiative. And I told her, when the time comes for me to buy the plot, I will buy it. Now, I kept the money for about 7 months. In fact, I just topped up her money and bought another taxi. And I told her, the money that you gave to me, I've topped up and I've bought another taxi. She said, it doesn't mind as long as you buy the piece of land for our home. 7 months later, I used to sell my taxis, many at once. I parked them at Shell petrol station, the one near Wandegea police station, and I sold 10 in one single go. And got the proceeds from those taxis. 5 of them went to buy 1 plot of land in Mienga. In fact, I later added on and they became 2. And I told her, I have bought it. The balance of these proceeds is going to start up a house. I built my house for 5 years. let it go on record. People were building houses so fast. I had 37 taxis on the road, but I built my house for 5 years. It is on record. Everybody knows. My colleagues that I was working with at Kaboja know Kachika is building a home in Muyenga. He goes every weekend to check onto the house because I did not want to deplete my business. I built it slowly. I started building it in 2001. I completed it in 2006, October. I remember it was Independence Day that I entered that house. But I had built it for 5 years. So this now, the building of a home, which is a fixed asset, though consumable, but it was a physical asset, tilted now the balance of my ratios of the assets. I started now getting fixed assets. I went on and went on with my life. I started liquidating the taxis and consolidated now into the trucks. As I multiplied my incomes, I started now consolidating into the fixed assets. I bought 8 acres of land, agri-productive land, where I am right now, bought another 20, bought 70. By the time I realized I was in 300 acres, which was about 7.5 B. Now, when I looked at the ratio of my fixed assets, the productive assets, because I was buying productive land, versus my movable assets or my liquid assets, it had been skewed. I had about 60% of my assets being fixed, and then about 40% being movable and also current assets. I was having a lot of cash in the bank because the taxis were bringing in a lot of money, and agriculture I was sinking it into the fixed assets to grow the value of my fixed assets over time. So you must learn. Now I had reached my 40s, early 40s, 41, 42, 43. I started changing the ratios from having a lot of liquid assets and movable assets to now having a lot of, in fact, at one point, when I realized that the value of my fixed assets was about 83%. I was driving which vehicle? I had a Volkswagen Golf and Passat. I had a BMW 530, and I decided to buy my wife a Mercedes-Benz. Lisa, she got a C-Class. That was 2005. And I added on another Mercedes-Benz, another E-Class, E320 Vanguard. And people were wondering, man, what's wrong with this man? 5 cars in the compound. I was just trying to neutralize my asset base. I wanted to increase a little bit onto the value of my movable assets, because I'm not the type that I have 1,000 suits, but I love cars. I love cars with good, especially German machines. I don't love cars, I love machines. So it's part of my, when I look at these German machines, they raise up my, I had 2 E-Class in my compound, a BMW, a 5 Series, a C-Class for the madam. And as the business grew, I added on an M-Class. Now, you can imagine, someone can ask, why do you have, 3, 4, 5 vehicles in your compound? And whoever was asking, I had the justification, and I tell them, boss, you need to know what percentage these rides constitute onto my total asset base. They don't go beyond 15%, and which was a good ratio. I had an M-Class, UAH 222Y. I had a 5 Series BMW, E-Class Vanguard, and an E320 American spec, and a C-Class in one compound. But it did not in any way, jeopardize my growth Why am I bringing these experiences or these examples? It's for the young men today. I see them. And with the advent of social media, at that time there was no social media that I was buying them to show them onto social media. No. In fact, even my neighbor was not seeing them, because when it enters, it doesn't come out. And for me, I have those many rides there, but they are, it's just to make me happy, because I could only drive the vehicles being sympathetic. When did I last drive that one, BMW? It's about 3 weeks. The battery is even going to go down. So I rearrange them. Tomorrow I go to my work with it. I'll drive it for 3 days. They will not see it again for a month. But today, young men are buying these vehicles for a show-off. And the social media has fueled it. That you realize that a young man is having 3 vehicles, whether he's having one, very expensive, and with the advent of selling them, Indian selling them on credit, you pay 40%, while they have hiked the price by 30%. And that is why there is a high repossession rate. What is the difference between Muhammad then, who had those many rides in his compound then, and probably some of the young men these days? These young men do not have a justified asset ratio. By the time Kachika had so many of those vehicles in his compound, he had 30 taxis on the road, minting 1.2 million every day. Or he had coasters, 12 of them on the road. And on top of that, so many trucks ferrying sand. So when you calculate the ratio of his movable assets versus his current assets versus his fixed assets, the man was in a healthy financial position. Can you check yourself and say, there's so many vehicles that I have, or so many movable assets that I have. This iPhone, one young man cracked a joke that whenever I see an iPhone 17, I'm seeing somebody who is having a car in his pocket. The guy is right. Because when I see a semi-jobless person posing around with an iPhone 17 and he doesn't have a car, that can't escape my mind. But for me, I can afford to put 3 MLs, ML, M, Bluetech, M, and the GLE, and the BMW. I can afford to put them into my compound. But when I try to carry out the correlation of those movable assets versus the fixed assets that I have, I'm unbuggable. Unbuggable. You call them gumit. I'm a gumit. Because these 4 cars, that is in one home. These 4 cars into the compound, an M, a Bluetech, a GLE, a BMW, as compared to my farming and land portfolio, they don't exceed 5%. They don't. In value, they don't. And the key point here is that, do young people know the stages of growth? The normal proper stages of growth? When you see this man, that on Monday he has gone, this whole week he's been driving, the following week he drives up another week he's driving, that man, he will soon collapse. You are mistaken. The percentage of these movable assets as compared to the physical assets this man possesses, you know, the correlation is not there. Because how is this man now able to maintain this when he's in a crude sector like farming? I have shown to you how I maintain my cash flow from the livestock, the cows. How my cows produce the milk, the manure, and how I sell the young bulls, how I sell the fattened cows, and how I sell the in-calf heifers. A few days ago, I showed to you how I've managed to turn, forests, which was a long-term investment, and turned it into a cash flow king by selling my trees, in gazetted arrangement, and the maximum time period being 4 or 5 years. Today, I'm showing to you that in an effort to maintain my cash flow, I have devised another route, excluding the cows, excluding the trees. I grow a lot of maize. Guys, maize is also a cash flow king. A staple crop, a staple foodstuff, which will never go wrong. The prices can fluctuate, but if you have value addition onto maize, you will never go wrong. Take, for instance, I showed to you a few months ago when I was stamping my coffee. The coffee had grown, it was about 7 years, so it was so tall. Picking it was a problem, and its yield had declined. So I decided to stamp. You cut those trees. When you cut them, they regrow and be like they are fresh trees. But they don't regrow like mushrooms. They take time, 6 months, and they will start flowering in a year. Between that time, what should I be doing with my land? I decided to plant maize. You can look at this maize now and tell me probably, Mr. Cash Flow King, how much money are you likely to generate from this maize? The one that looks so beautiful like that, and which, inshallah, if it is to give the proper yield, how much, whether it is in silage or fresh maize, or I dry it into maize flour and maize bran, how much money am I likely to fetch? Another case study, I showed it to you in an area where I had planted trees, eucalyptus trees, and all of a sudden I said, no, this was a mistake. I should be planting maize here. I uprooted the trees. I showed it to you when I was uprooting the trees. Since that time when I uprooted the trees, I have planted twice maize in that place. Right now there is maize that is about to put on stocks. Inshallah, we might get the maize from there. Now I can take you to another third case study. Over 100 acres, it's about 120 acres, already planted. You can have a look at it. Stretching from one side to the other side, punctuated with eucalyptus trees. Do you have to doubt this man when they say he's a cash flow king? With all that maize, put into consideration how people are so much these days talking about maize, how maize is making a lot of money, how maize, but they have never shown to you their shambas. There comes in one man who does not run the pictures high speed, that you will never have the actual ability to see the actual maize. Mamedika Chika gives it to you whole as it is. You can now watch my maize and see. and the results speak for themselves. Have a good day.